This week in economics from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Bostonred Network onto the Numbers Man franchise. Nonetheless, we're on the 7th of April 2018 for this episode. We'll start with the employment situation, which is put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They are always out here. Every month, the employment situation is what they call it, and it is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Nonetheless, we'll go to it in a minute, but let's cover some other things that we'll be talking about here. We have two very interesting articles here. Actually, they are studies from Vox. More and more companies have monopolies over workers' wages that kill the economy. This is by Sasha Nudur and Eric Posner and Glenn Viri, V-Y-L. Anyway, it's interesting here because this is a study, and we're just sort of premiering it right now. It is a study here, and it raises some very interesting questions about some assumptions on the market and the company town, etc., and what trade unions play. And we have another very interesting one. This is from the Atlantic, but this is Walmart and the future workforce, robotics, and freelancers, the so-called gig economy. This is by Amy Merrick. It was on the 4th on the human capital. Anyway, we'll get to these, but we'll first do the employment situation here, and then we'll come back, and we'll also look at here's how we know when it's an actual trade war. This is from CNBC. I thought it'd be interesting to bring it out here, and some facts from Columbia University. Nonetheless, we'll go to the employment situation first. We have the household survey, and nonetheless, the total non-farm payroll employment edged up by 103,000 in March. The unemployment rate remained unchanged, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported today employment increased in manufacturing, healthcare, and mining. Now, this is interesting in that some of the economists surveyed, particularly by Thomson Reuters, predicted the rate of unemployment would drop to 4%. But it really doesn't matter. To the household survey here in March, the unemployment rate was 4.1% for the sixth consecutive month, and the number of unemployed persons at 6.6 million, little change there. Among the major worker groups, the unemployment rate for adult men at 3.7%, adult women also at 3.7%, teenagers at 13.5%, for Europeans 3.6%, for African Americans 6.9%, for Asians 3.1%, and for Latinos 5.1%, showed little change there. At 1.3 million, the number of long-term unemployed, those jobless for more than 27 weeks, for 27 weeks or more, little change in March, accounted for 20.3% of the unemployed. Over year, the number of unemployed was down by 338,000. The labor force participation rate, little changed here at 62.9%. Changed little in March. The employment population ratio at 6.6 4%. The number of persons employed part-time for economic reasons, referred to as involuntary part-time workers, was little changed at 5 million people there. In March, these individuals would have had better working conditions if they could have located them. In March, 1.5 million persons were marginally attached to the labor force, little different from a year earlier. These individuals were not in the labor force, wanted or were available for work, and had looked sometime in the past year or 12 months, as they put it here. They were not counted as unemployed because they had not searched for work in 4 weeks preceding the survey. Among the marginally attached, 450,000 discouraged workers in March, essentially unchanged from 2017. The remaining 1 million workers marginally attached to the labor force had not searched for work for reasons such as school attendance, family responsibilities. On to the established survey data, total non-farm payroll edged up 103,000. In March, employment in manufacturing rose by 22,000, with all the gains in durable goods. Employment in fabricated metal products increased over the month by 9,000. Over the year, manufacturing has had 232,000 jobs. The durable goods component accounted for 3/4 of the jobs added. In March, healthcare added 22,000 jobs, in line with the average over 12 months. Employment continues to trend up over the month in ambulatory health care services, 16,000, medical centers, 10,000. Employment in mining increased by 9,000 in March, which gains occurring in support activities for mining, 6,000. In oil gas extraction, 2,000. Mining employment has risen by 78,000 since the low in October of 2016. Employment in professional and business service continued to trend up in March, 33,000, and has risen 502,000 over the year. Retail trade employment, little changed in March, down by 4,000, very hard hit there, after creating 47,000 jobs in February, and in March employment declined by 13,000. General merchandising offset by gains of the same in February. Over year, employment in retail trade has shown little net change. In March, employment in construction also changed little, negative 15,000, following gains of of 65,000 in February. Employment changed little over a month in other major industries, including wholesale, transportation, warehousing, information, financial activities, leisure, hospitality, and government. The average work week for all workers on private non-farm payrolls was unchanged at 34.5 hours in March. In manufacturing, the work week edged down 1/10 of an hour to 49.9. 9. Overtime edged down also, by 1/10 hour to 3.5 hours. The average work week for production and non-supervisory workers edged down 1/10 to 33.7. The average work week for all workers, hourly, earnings increased by 8 cents to $26.82 over year. The average hourly earning has increased by 71%. I was looking at some of the teachers out in the Midwest recently ratified a contract. I believe this was in Minneapolis, and they were getting 0.5%. The average here is 2.7, and given different divisions or skill levels within teachers over the next 2 years, it would amount to about a 2% raise, less than 2.7 here. Nonetheless, hourly earnings from private sector production non-supervisory workers increased by 4 cents to $22.42. The total change in total non-farm payroll employment for January was revised down. Oh boy. From 239,000 to 176,000. Their change from February was revised up. $313,000 to 326,000 with revisions and employment gains in January and February combined were 50,000 less than previously reported. Monthly revisions resulted from additional reports received from business government agencies. All revision job gains, an average of we're down here at 202,000 over the 3-month running average. There was what you got. So basically, it's not as good as it once looked. Since January being revised down to 176,000 from 339,000. We'll call that 340,000. We won't quibble. Nonetheless, the changes was revised up. This was in February to 326,000 from 313,000. So if you add the gains in January and February combined, were 50,000 less than previously reported. Monthly revisions, etc. Going over this, last published estimates and a recalculation of seasonal factors after revision job gains averaged 202,000. Went over this twice because of how it was going. Nonetheless, the next release of the employment situation this will be for April, will be on the 4th of May 2018. This sort of segues us into Walmart, the future workforce, robotics, and freelancers. Now, a lot of this is the gig economy. Over the past few weeks, Walmart executives have sketched a picture of the company's future that features more self-checkouts. These are across the industry. A grocery delivery business, soon escalating to 100 different cities. There are pilot programs here. Personal shoppers will fill plastic totes with avocados, etc., and hand it off to crowdsource drivers idle in the parking lot. So in other words, be a contract situation. Workers on handy and online marketplace for home services will mount TVs and assemble furniture. Gotta have my jobber. Nonetheless, Walmart's of the future rely more heavily on the gig economy and automation. This includes a fierce competition between Walmart, the world's largest private employer, and Amazon. A pair of recent studies suggests that it also signals that the U.S. economy is tilting further towards jobs that give workers less marketing power. This is one of the things we'll be covering here. And there is a study here, and we'll append the study by Dubey, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, Jeff Jacobson, and Suresh Naidu of Columbia University, and Sihat Sadre of Microsoft Research sought to learn whether cloud source workers benefit from the from being able to choose their tasks and hours. The answer matters a lot on the workers' flexible work arrangements, which include these so-called crowd-sourcing platforms as well as Uber. And that can be increased, let's see, Uber as well as freelancers. Freelancers have been around forever. Independent contractors increased about 50% from 2005 to 2015. These jobs now account for 94% of nearly all net employment gains in the U.S. over that time period. The shift could be good for workers in theory, the flexibility there, but is it really flexibility? The economy lets them switch more easily between employers to take advantage of higher paying offers. Yet the analysis of the online tasks marketplace, Amazon Mechanical Turk, the researchers found that this isn't necessarily happening. MTurk workers and Turkers get paid for repetitive tasks such as tagging objects found in images or verifying restaurant phone numbers. And according to the survey, Turkers, that's T-U-R, anyway, wages amount to less than 20% of their productivity. In other words, for every dollar produced on MTurk, workers receive less than 20 cents, with a share of 50 to 80 cents of every dollar for workers in the U.S. economy as a whole. That's what Nadal said. This suggests that much of the surplus created by this online labor market platform is captured by the employers. The research, right? This doesn't make initiative intuitive sense. Since workers can easily switch between tasks, it seems the employers would be forced to compete for them by offering good wages. This isn't the generally taking place. One explanation is that while workers can shop around for better deals, employers can do the same. This may be more important for Amazon to design a crowd-sourcing platform that keeps employers happy. After all, Amazon's revenue comes from charging these employers a fee. If the platforms such as Uber have a similar design, favoring buyers and the drivers drop off, Walmart grocers wouldn't have as much bargaining power. Wages are going to fall. This is what News predicts. It's interesting that Walmart is being so proactive in the gigifying of its own workforce. Retail is a sector that you thought could not really outsource, but maybe that was wrong, and no doubt about that, because if you start home deliveries, and that's done by a lot of people that do that sort of thing, and it's only a minimal type income that they receive. I was talking to a gentleman several months ago that delivered everything from I wanted to say fertilizer, but I forget what it was. He was delivering in bags. It was to construction sites. And he also delivered catered goods. So a lot of different things he did. He had his own van, of course, paying his own petrol bill. So these are some of the things out there, and he got a percentage of the take, so to speak. Second pillar of Walmart's approach, automation could also be bad for workers, has doubled its use of self-checkout in the U.S. I remember when I did some work with IBM, and we started with the self-checkout stands, although we never installed any, but that was one of the things that were coming out there. And some of the Kmarts were some of the first ones to do that. Didn't do them very much good, though, however. What more inside its Store 8 incubator, which is experimenting with technologies such as robotics, virtual and augmented reality, and artificial intelligence. Walmart, according to Recode is developing Project Kepler, similar to Amazon Go, with no checkout lines, are cashiers, and we talked about that in these broadcasts before. David Alter of MIT and Anne Solomons of Urich University recently published a study on automation that examines data from 28 industries in 18 countries. They find that since 1970, automation hasn't reduced jobs. In fact, it is slightly increased them. But since the beginning of 2000, automation has reduced workers' share of national income. This finding is consistent with automation having become, in recent decades, less labor augmenting and more labor displacing. According to their research, workers' employment hours or wages haven't fallen, but wages haven't risen. Have risen less rapidly than overall economic growth, and this is one of the things that explain that no robots, will take your job. That's according to a Brookings video. The concern should not be about the number of jobs, but whether these jobs are jobs that can support a reasonable standard of living. And this is one of the big things that happens here. You can create a lot of these, what's called in the cadence, nickel and dime type jobs, period. Thus, Walmart, low pay, skimpy health plans, well, a lot of that has changed there. They were under the tax cuts from the Trump administration. They raised the hourly to $11 an hour. That's $19,000 a year. That's for someone that worked 44 hours. Handed out bonuses, provided more benefits to full-time workers. Thus, they solved the question of moving towards a 15 an hour. But, however, better compensation core of workers who are supplemented by automation and flexible cadre. Now, this is interesting here. The gig economy workers, 10 years from now, there will be fewer associates at Walmart. No doubt about it. In all this, Walmart is trying to adopt to a rapid growth of Amazon, which reported 178 billion, if you can imagine that. About 315,000 per worker. That's that there. Walmart, of course, is much larger with 500 billion in annual revenue, but because its workers about employs about four times as many workers, the revenue amounts to 217,000 per worker. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Walmart. The change to Walmart's business model could particularly be hard on young people who seek retail work. That's between the age of 18 and 24, nearly double the overall representation of the U.S. workforce. Not all of this is seamlessly shipped to the gig economy, and they talk about Uber and basically long-haul truck drivers. I think they have to be 25 or 26. 21 at Uber, so the 18 can't get into that. So there are some things starting to appear here. So when you hear on the news about all the jobs being created, it really depends on what jobs are being created, period. This is the National Bureau of Economic Research. In March, we don't have the full paper. This is, we'll have to get the paper, but anyway, this is just the study, the monopsony of in online labor. We won't get into that. We were going to pinch it, but the whole study is not there. But what we will do is, from Vox, you have basically the same thing. This is by Nadal and Posner. Here, the big idea: current economic expansion has lasted more than 9 years, commonly called the Obama economy. Workers have risen only by 3%. The average pay there since 1970s. There's an actual decline for the bottom fifth. For a long time, the conventional wisdom, and this is where we're getting into some economic theory here, was that wage growth had slowed because of rising competition from low-paid workers in other countries, globalization, as well as the replacement of workers with machines, including robotics. But in recent years, economists have discovered another source: the growth of the labor market power of the employer, namely their power to dictate, hence suppress wages. The new wisdom has displaced a long-standing assumption, this is amongst economists, that labor markets are competitive. In competitive labor markets, employers must vie for workers. They try to lure workers from other firms by offering them more generous compensation. As employers bid for workers, wages and benefits rise. Employers gain by hiring workers whenever the worker's wages is less than the revenue the worker will generate. As the economy grows over time, which historically has been the case in the U.S., this dynamic should naturally lead to steady increases in compensation. It hasn't happened that way, and part of that is explained by the Walmartization of the U.S. economy. Growth over time historically has been the case. And it turns out, however, the labor markets are often uncompetitive. Employers have the power to hold down wages by a host of methods and for numerous reasons. New academic studies suggest. Remember the old company town, but this example here, the company town was in history providing housing. They still do this in India. Since such towns have only one employer, the worker can't leave for better pay, uprooting the family, etc. This was the idea of what they literally call sharecropping after slavery in the South. Few company towns exist today. Still, a variation exists in some regions, at least for certain occupations. A nurse or a doctor live in a small town. A rural area can often choose only a handful of medical institutions within a driving distance of his or her domicile. And in many areas in rural America, and this is interesting there, the chicken processing plant, the private prison, the agribusiness, and other large-scale employers that dominate their local economy. Workers can either choose to take job offers or incur the turmoil of moving elsewhere. Another source of labor market power are so-called non-compete contracts. A lot of those running around there. Even some person like old Jimmy John's, a sandwich franchise, famously asked its what they call sandwich artists to sign the covenants forbidding them to take jobs with Jimmy John's competition. The Justice Department has cracked down on some of those. There are other and more subtle ways that employers gain market power. Different employers often different working hours, lead policies and workplace conditions, and workers tend to choose employers whose conditions suit their personal and family situation. If such an employer cuts wages, a worker may be unwilling to move to another employer. Developing a specific set of skills can be a double-edged sword too, opening doors yet limiting mobility. An expert welder works only for a manufacturer in a town may not find it easy to leave that job. Match problem is an exacerbated by time and energy the job search demands. It can be hard to hold a job while seeking a job. That is been found in many studies and actual observations I've had over time. Unions and regulations often keep employer labor market power in check, but little of this in the type of arrangement we have now. The good times ended in the 70s, globalization, change in the workplace technology, and the rise of more homogeneous workforce puts strain on unions. A conservative reaction to technocrat liberalism that was led by Reagan and Thatcher in the UK eroded support for unions and labor laws. For a time, economists believed that labor markets were nonetheless competitive, but that conventional wisdom was vaporized by a series of empirical studies that suggested labor market power is real and significant. A number of studies summarized here have found, for example, that when wages fall by 1%, only about 2 to 3% of workers leave at most. And this is an example with the teachers. If the labor markets were really competitive, we might expect the figure to be closer to 9 or 10%. Other studies found that employers' concentration has increased over time. In other words, fewer places to go actually offer your skills up. The power of employer, the cost of employer power, wage suppression, it hurts workers at least benefit consumers who pay low prices for goods and services, since the cost of production is lower for companies. In fact, that's not the case. Employer market power, sometimes called monopolies, harm economic growth and raise prices. Monopolies is a concept of monopoly or dominance of a market for a given good applies to the buy side, namely that the input that firms purchase, including labor and materials. Monopolies harm growth and raise prices because it works much like a monopoly by reducing a production to increase its profit. The monopolist raises prices, thus lowers the production because fewer consumers are willing to pay the price. And this is something we see more and more of now, particularly at supermarkets. Similar to raise its profits, from firms bear the loss in workers, resulting in lower sales in exchange for higher profits made off the workers who do not quit. This goes back to what Karl Marx called the reserve army of the unemployed, resulting groups of workers looking for jobs, period. Employed labor markets thus reduce employment, raise prices, and depress the economy. Thus, these sound a lot like the harm that conservative economists have long attributed to excess taxes. Now, there's no coincidence. Wage suppression is just like a tax on the labor of workers. And that is the new item on the political side on WBRN is Bostonred Red. We talk about the case for taxes, case for less taxes, and what that is doing. And this is why it tends to get very confusing for the voter. To make matters worse, because monopolies tax drives workers out of the labor force and simultaneously reduce tax revenues, increase social welfare payouts to the unemployed and destitute. This is the reason that the conservatives in the Congress want to eliminate social programs, such as Medicaid in the field of health care, such as states tightening up their unemployment compensation rules, their social spending, if any, which euphemistically used to call welfare payments, payments to or aid to families, children, food sufficiency, used to be food stamps. All these things are being tightened up so that they can offer these types of increases. Our focus is to agree that employers' labor market power that prevails throughout the economy to represent the phenomena. We use a parameter that ranges from a 0, representing perfect competition in the labor market, to 1, there's only a single employer in the whole economy. So you won't get too much into methodology. We'll just append this because this is the most valuable one we've had, period. In our working paper, we we take a first cut of the estimate of the effects of monopolies on both employment rates and wages. The employment we calculated is 5 to 8% less than it would be in a competitive market. Hence, Marx's reserve army of the unemployed will explain as real wages are even more distributed, given that the economy works. Historically, labor share of the economy output should be about 74% if markets were perfectly competitive, because employers have power to drive it down. Labor's share of economic output falls to somewhat between 50 and 54%. This transfers significant income inequality. To put it more on the country terms, the minimum wage, this is a nurse, and we'll say 68,000. Given what we know about the labor market power of the medical institutions, the true competitive wage for a nurse would be 90,000, possibly even 200,000. But however, because in most areas have fewer medical centers, and that is no doubt, that's the consequences of quote-unquote national policy, that we have rural hospitals, various hospitals, closing completely, as in places like Kansas. And we also have situations where there are mergers, so in other words, less places for people to work. If the labor market as a whole, the median annual compensation is, say, 30,000. If markets were competitive, we estimate this amount could rise to 41,000, and possibly as much as $92,000. Now, this is actually what it happens. We'll append this. I won't spend much more time on it, but because tax rates on labor income are higher than on capital income, and because overall loss in output, our model finds that revenue falls as well. Our calculation suggests that revenue declines by 20 to 58% as a result of labor market power. And this is why you have these continual mergers in various industries, the telecom industries, etc. You find some of that in IT, that you have more and more mergers there. Let me just finish this up, and we'll go to do the numbers. Here's how we know when an actual trade war is out. This is CNBC. In just over a month, what began as tariffs on steel and aluminum has grown into a war of words between China and the U.S. 1,500 products on the line. Their reluctance is partially a matter of semantics. In recent months, economists and investors alike have liberally entertained the looming possibility of a trade war between China and the U.S., but no objective definition of such conflict exists. In itself, it's a nebulous word, as a professor at Bostonred, professor at Columbia University. So far, Bostonred says the Trump administration actions against President Xi government on trade are opening shots to get the Chinese for what they are doing for a long time. Announced, of course, these won't get into that. This wasn't the first move to retaliate against the country's perceived, unfair trade practices. The U.S. moved towards tariffs against Canadian softwood. I had much about initially proposed. That was in April of 2017. His successor, economist and senior contributor This is Larry Crislow, has insisted that the U.S. and China are in negotiation. Fear of a protectionist White House sparking a global trade war linger, no doubt about that. If both impose tariffs and actually employ them, I guess it would be called trade war. That's from Michael Ingram, chief economist at Action Economics. But the U.S. and China have moved more to escalate their own increasing trade relationships in recent years. He signed executive orders to DJ Trump that slaps China with tariffs, later revised to total approximately $50 billion and counting. The order triggers 1,300 basically products. China responded by announcing tariffs on 50 billion imports from the U.S. And this will go on. What's not really mentioned in this article is that China's policy 2025, that they have list key industries in China, that the focus will be the Chinese market. With 1.2 billion people, they can do this. Our take is that these machinations by Trump and company will only move the time up 2 or 3 years. And as China moves more to a model of marketing within China, and plus also their raw materials, extractions, and trade with other countries, particularly in Africa, where they can both sell goods and trade goods, and that is some in parts of South America, those areas, and in Europe. And with the Russian Federation also, and with India, another billion plus people. But as those trades start to materialize, that doesn't put the U.S. in very good shape, because U.S. is fighting with Canada, but that's a small market. With Mexico, the gateway to the rest of the American continent, so to speak. These things don't bode well at all, and also you see a number of things going on out here which you normally don't see. DJ Trump's talking about stimulus in an economy that is growing, but at the same time is losing speed. You have a tax cut that's supposed to stimulate the economy. The last 3 months of the year Q1, now going into Q2, have basically stated that has not helped. Now, this is one of the big problems with this economy. Tax cuts and so forth for the corporations have either given out bonuses, increased compensation, and are on stock buybacks. But that is pretty much, it's starting to run its course, and in the first 6 months of the year it should completely run its course. On the other part, the individual tax cuts, those tables have been filtering out since February, and most employers had put it to the workers in March. And now we're in April. On the 7th, we look at tax refunds that are out. The deadline is the 16th this year. And by June, most of that money, first or second week in June, would have filtered into the economy also. And we'll look at and see exactly where that is. And at the same time, in the petroleum area, there have been a lackluster market there because of overproduction. That just says there's not enough demand out there. And this has been one of the big problems. And then in the so-called new economy, where we get into the Facebooks of the world and those people hit by scandals over privacy, that has brought down some of the tech market. And of course, these trade wars have brought down the stock market. And at the same time, some of DJ Trump's former advisors, Bannon, who used to be his chief strategist, said the stock market doesn't matter. But in macroeconomics now, it does matter because of the nature of this economy and the nature of globalization as far as the industrial capitalists are concerned. But you still have monetary policy out there and inflation on the rise because of the power of these employers. Supermarkets raising their prices, some consolidation. I was looking at one of the major supermarket chains trying to sell itself, the Super Value in Minnesota. But numerous others the same way, and there's a long list that have been bought out, consolidated. Hedge funds are moving in on these operators, and it's more of this consolidation, particularly in the food sector, in the telecommunications sector more. Even in the cable operation, a lot of people have moved out of cable, and then you also have headsets for your smartphones. Is more and more commoditized as they go. So these are some of the things that are happening out here, are changing things, and now you see Walmart moving to the automated way, so you'll have less activity. So effectively what starts to happen here, these large stores, shopping centers are hit very hard, you'll see less and less of those. Because if people aren't coming in, you have quote-unquote personal shoppers running amok. All you basically need is big warehouses for them to run in. You don't need to have the stores with all the displays and all that added cost. Let's do the numbers now. I hope this has made some sense. We will append the one article there because it is very important to have. This is from the BBC. The BBC Global 30. This is on Friday at a negative 215.33. I believe this is, let me just make sure that, update this because we put it up on the workstation. It's been a few hours ago. I believe this still will be all Friday. Okay. Anyway, the FTSE All Share was down also 7.81. This is all Friday data unless otherwise noted. In Amsterdam, they were down 1.20. In Frankfurt, the DAX was down 63.92 on Friday. In Paris, they were down 18.43. In Brussels, down 18.95. In Madrid, they were down 58.10. Not a good day for the markets. Trade war looming. In Zurich, they were down 71.56. In Moscow on Friday, down 7.06, or not 6. In Johannesburg, they were down 294.82. In Bombay, they were actually in the green, 30 or positive range, 30.17. In Karachi, also 54.21. In Lahore, they were down 45.11. In Colombo, they were down 19.38. And in Tehran on Wednesday, 64.40. In Sydney, they were down 1.10 on Friday. The Nikkei was down 77.90 in the negative. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng at 326.25. In Shanghai, they were down 5.62 on Wednesday. In New York on Friday, they were down 572.46, or negative 2.34%. The Nasdaq was also down a negative 61.44. The Merck, that's a commodities market out in the Midwest city of Chicago, was down also negative 58.37. And in San Pablo on Monday, a negative 1,046.71. And on Friday in Mexico, a negative 648.71. for 2. Well, that did change. And let's look at the commodities here. Brent crude. Oh, what's happened here? We don't have the spot for some. Oh, sorry about that. We do. Brent crude futures down $1.34 at 66.99, and on the spot they were up 31 cents at $63.83. West Texas Intermediate, was down $1.56 at $61.98. Tipo and Pickens still jumping for joy. You remember the $15 barrel oil, which is basically where it is now. Gold on the Forex, no movement there. Let's see here. Well, what's the movement there? It was down $9.60 at $1,323.85. Dubai Gold Futures were down $7.80 at $1,328.60. Silver was down 15 cents at $16.23. Unix Life Futures, cocoa was down 326. Yeah, and Robusta coffee was also down $42. Well, that's good. Hopefully we'll get some cheaper coffee prices in here. And the Bloomberg Commodities Index on a Friday was off a negative 0.24. So everyone was down. A lot of red ink out there as a result of this so-called trade war. It's not a matter of, to sum this up, not a matter of semantics. It is actually a matter, as far as the markets are concerned, the psychology of the markets. Now that comes firstly, that you deal with that, and that is what took the markets down. But is actual these tariffs go into effect, then it will, and that's another thing that has to move through the economy. It doesn't happen all at once. Now there obviously will be some, but products will cost more. In America, steel from beer cans to bridges, and if they get any of this so-called infrastructure program off the ground, it will just simply cost more to build bridges, airports, etc., including, we assume, this wall scheme they've got going. But anyway, nonetheless, this cost will go up, and of course the cost going up will cause some inflation. Interest rates will go up, and thus some borrowing will go down. In other words, you got Rick Goldberg going on here. I mean, you really got some problems going on here. Bananas economy. And we look to see where the jobs go. Now, usually your first month of Q1, you start to set something. But that's not happened here. You've had things, the fall, February was a little bit better. But at the same time, this month, not much going on. Is it attributed to climatic conditions? Well, possibly so in some places, but in general, 103,000 jobs, not very good. They could be revised up. We don't know. Manufacturing, I suppose you'd say, did its part there, but manufacturing in March was on par with healthcare. That many of the quote-unquote critics in the conservative wing said that Obamacare would kill healthcare, but thus healthcare has been in a solid situation, no doubt about it. But again, retail trade is pretty much out of it. Professional business services did trend up 33,000. And over a year, 500,000 basically there. So those things have, in manufacturing, 232,000? It's in the durable goods situation. But fabricated metal products over the month, 9,000 there. So some things have changed, but we'll be looking to future months there to see a construction, a negative 15,000. Unusually cold March, so an unusually cold also now. April. Of course, construction had its largest gain now, and this was in February, which it basically says things are tapped out. You went to plus 65,000 to a negative 15,000. A lot of work out there, but the construction trade is basically a trade where you build buildings or whatever you're building, and when that cease, you cease, basically speaking. And in many areas, you've seen a lot of apartments being built, and it depends on which area. And we do this state-by-state thing, and hopefully we'll get some of those numbers out here. This will do it for us, and for those in business. Make next week a productive one. For the consumer, your eye is obviously on the prize, and has been on the prize for quite some time now. And we will pinch those. This whole idea is changing. This even does something to the Phillips curve if you look at it. But the whole idea of perfect markets, competitive markets, is out the window, period. And now we're dealing with employers that are monopolizing, in other words, a monopoly by employers. That's back to basically the time that Karl Marx was writing, when working people's associations were just starting. Trade unions were just starting early. Well, he was in the 1800s, but you go into the 1900s, the battle for trade unions, and of course, after the battles in the 30s, unions got to be stronger, and then you had the Great War, where every worker that could work was put to work. A lot of prosperity, a lot of New Deal programs coming in there, particularly in housing, but that was a segregated program under the apartheid. But still, it was there. GIs going back to university. All that stimulated what was called the baby boomers, which are still in business now. This is a reason for your ambulatory healthcare situation, etc. But that will also pass. So where will all this automation, personal shoppers, etc. go is going to be a very interesting situation. We'll see you next week.